Welcome to the Patriots Pulse post-game show. I'm your host, John Serenitas, and as always, I'm joined by my partner, WEI's John Lyons. First things first, John, good to see you, man.
Yeah, good to see you too. Home opener today for the Patriots. And unfortunately, John, similar story to a lot of the games we've seen at Gillette Stadium over the past couple of years.
Yeah, you just hit the nail on the head. I mean, I think that that's probably the best way to introduce what happened today. Look, I think on the one hand, you have to be pretty happy with the way they played. I thought they played well at times. I thought they competed. I thought they did a lot of good things. But I think what we saw with this game, John, is that when they needed to win this game, when it came down to, for lack of a better term, nut cutting time, they just couldn't get it done. They have a 48-yard field goal blocked. They couldn't get a third down conversion when they needed it offensively to extend one of those last couple of drives to potentially either kick the game winning field goal or even perhaps score the game winning touchdown. And ultimately, they lose it in overtime. And I would also throw the defense into that because when the defense needed to make key stops today, they couldn't do it either. Frustrating loss in the sense that it was there for them. They could have won this game, but ultimately, their inability to make plays in key situations in all three phases of the game proved to be the difference.
Yeah, that's really to me the theme of this game. And we've talked about this, John, many times before, right? You have a rookie head coach, rookie defensive coordinator, essentially a rookie special teams coordinator. I know he did it in college. You have an offensive coordinator that first time in 15 years he's calling plays. You have a lot of new faces playing key roles for you, including starting quarterback. So there was going to be some games like this where it came down to the wire and situationally they didn't do the right thing. I mean, again, we talked about this. This is not a big surprise. I think the key here, John, is what do they do going forward to correct it? Because you look at some of these examples. End of the first half, they have the ball inside their own 10, and they have two incomplete passes. Seattle doesn't even have to use a timeout in that situation. They get the ball back near midfield, and they go down to get a field goal. The defense doesn't get the key stop. Like, that's a situation you lose. The timeout early in the third quarter to avoid the 12 men on the field penalty. The other timeout in the fourth quarter when the play clock was near the end. So you mentioned the field goal as well. So all these situations, can they learn from it? Can they improve? Because that was the issue the last 2 years. I mean, how many one possession games did they lose last year because they kept screwing up situations or they kept making catastrophic mistakes on offense? If they can avoid that this year, they'll win more games. It's just they didn't avoid it today. And what I want to see is, can they learn from it?
Yeah, same here. I mean, look, you mentioned that this was a pattern for them last season where they couldn't finish in key situations and it ultimately cost them a lot of games. I mean, we've talked about this throughout the offseason that if 5 or 6 of those games that were close last year go their way, Bill Belichick is probably still here.
Yeah.
So again, they seem to be in the same boat this year. Now, I think offensively, look, it's kind of the same game plan as last week. Run the football, control the clock, set up the play action passing game, utilize your drop back passing game off of that. Running game was fine, 185 yards rushing. Antonio Gibson, 11 carries, 91 yards rushing. Ramondre Stevenson, 21 carries, 81 yards rushing, and a touchdown. The issue here, John, is that if aside from Hunter Henry's career day today, where he caught 8 passes for 109 yards, the rest of the skill group caught 40 yards worth of passes. There was only 2 receivers that caught passes. Jalen Polk, of course, he did score his first career NFL touchdown, and KJ Osborne. The 2 of them totaled 19 yards receiving. That was it. This is a problem for this football team, and we talked about it after the Cincinnati game last week. Their inability to get these receivers involved. It was even worse this week. They couldn't get them involved at all. They were non-existent. My question to you is, and this came up a lot after the game in the locker room, but how do you fix this? How do you go about fixing it? Because Gerard Mayo had to address it in his post-game press conference, Hunter Henry, David Andrews, guys in the locker room. How do you fix it? How do you find a way to get these guys more involved?
Yeah, I mean, so far it's been a multi-pronged failure. Right? I mean, like, I think DeMario Douglas is their most talented receiver, and he no catches today. I think he was targeted once, and no impact really last week either. So they can't get the slot position involved at all because they have a good enough slot guy in Douglas to make plays, and they just can't find a way to get that position involved. So for me, I think there's a couple elements here that need to improve. One is the pass protection. Like, we can talk all day long about Jacoby's got to push the ball downfield more. And I know Mayo said that at his post-game press conference that he wants the ball to be pushed downfield more and receivers got to get open. But I mean, Brissett was sacked 3 times. But John, you're an O-line guy. You know this. He was under duress a lot in this game. Like I
Big
mentioned,
time.
yeah, I mentioned those couple incomplete passes at the end of the first half. There was almost a safety in there, and he just got out of pressure. So that doesn't show up on the stat sheet as a sack, but under heavy pressure, it happened a lot. We saw him get hit a bunch in this game, got up wincing multiple times. So if you can't protect, you can't push the ball down the field. So that's got to get better. We'll see what's up with Vidarian Lowe. He did leave with an injury. And the other piece of it is, I think they got to take a couple shots, not a ton, but just 1 or 2 shots a half downfield, even if they're incomplete right now. And look, obviously you want to complete them, but we saw Javon Baker get limited reps today. Maybe just give him 1 or 2 of those shots, because all you have to do, John, is hit one. And then the defense will start to back off a little bit, and it makes things easier for a guy like Douglas or a guy like Polk. But I feel like in these 2 games, they haven't even really tried it. I mean, they had no plays over 20 yards against Cincinnati. I think they had 2 plays over 20 yards today, but they were both rushes, or a rush and a short pass that was broken long. So I just think you got to at least try to push it a little bit, but you got to improve that pass protection first.
Yeah, I do want to remind you out there, if you're watching, feel free to join the conversation. You are watching the show live on X, our YouTube page, Facebook, and Twitch. Feel free to comment in the comment section. We'll put up your comment when you decide to participate. As always, we know you have an abundance of post-game options, but this is the show for the fans, so feel free to jump on and share your thoughts with us. We would love to hear from you. Yeah, the offensive line, look, we've been saying it all offseason, all summer, going into the season. We knew they were going to be a problem. But, I mean, today was a prime example of it. You didn't see it as much last week. I thought last week they did enough that they didn't get noticed. They played well enough that they weren't going to necessarily be a focal point, but they were a focal point today. And I think you bring up a great point, John. Seattle only had 3 sacks, but they could have very easily had 7. Yeah. They could have had 4 or 5 more. Brissett did a really good job of getting out of the pocket, extending plays, and throwing on the move. If he doesn't do that, this game probably isn't as close. It probably doesn't go into overtime. And you're right. They need to figure out this offensive line. They need to figure things out from a pass protection standpoint, because you can want to take shots down the field and you can make that a priority, and you can want to get Javon Baker more involved and Pop and everybody else. But at the end of the day, if you can't protect your quarterback, it's not going to matter. You're not going to be able to take those shots down the field if he can't hold up in the pocket. And right now, I mean, they have a black hole at left tackle.
Yeah.
Okorafor is not with the team right now. Vidarian Lowe gets hurt today. Caden Wallace plays some. You have to assume he's going to start on Thursday night. You hope he gives them something more. But right now, I mean, the next guy up is DeMontre Jacobs. I mean, you really are in a bind at that position, and it's affecting the play of the entire offensive line across the board, and you saw that today. Real quick here, our good friend Lauren Gaudette checks in. Like Death and Taxes, Gaudette's going to check into the Patriots post-game show here, the Patriots post-game show. I didn't understand that Brissett got more protection, but I didn't see a lot of flat or underneath routes. The 3rd and 6 late, 4th with no underneath or hot route caused a sack. Then the field goal was blocked. You guys have talked about how OCs can be stubborn. Yeah, thanks for checking in, Lauren. They can be stubborn, absolutely. I thought they did work the ball into the flat to the backs today. I mean, they got Stevenson involved. They got Gibson involved. I get what Lauren is saying, and I think she brings up a valid point. But again, I think ultimately, John, when you look at this passing game, it's really more about what they're not doing in the middle of the field or vertically. They're just not making any substantial plays. I don't even want to say big plays. They're not making any impact plays in the intermediate or deep passing game.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is their run game through 2 weeks has been phenomenal. I mean, Ramondre
185 total yards today.
Yeah, Ramondre Stevenson has looked terrific. The offensive line has run blocked really well. Even receivers have been blocking pretty well downfield. I mean, their run game as a whole has been great. It's just this passing game, again, under 150 yards passing today. They had, I think under 150 yards passing last week, either under 200 yards both weeks passing the ball. That's just not – look, like you and I said this after the game last week, that style of play will win you some games like it did last week, but it's not going to win all the time, and it didn't today, right? Like they essentially offensively, they were very similar this week to last week. It ran the ball very well, passed it largely inconsistently and mostly ineffectively. And last week, it was enough for them to get a 16-10 win. Today, maybe if they don't get that field goal blocked, it's a 23-6-17 win, or who knows, but they lost 23-20. So I think that's the issue here is their run game has been great. I think Van Pelt's been okay considering what he has to work with. I think there was a 3rd and 3 in the third quarter where he ran the ball against the Seahawks heavy personnel. I didn't like that call, but for the most part, I thought he was fine. And Lauren's not all wrong. They could work the ball underneath a little bit more, but it's tough because if you're a defense, what are you going to do? Bring some pressure, play cover one underneath, or tight zone. And it's really difficult to throw the ball short when that's what you're presented with if you're Brissett.
Yeah, and they don't have big play capability. So it's not like they can take the top off the coverage and stress a defense vertically to where they're going to be more cognizant of playing stuff over the top and give you some of the underneath stuff. They're not going to give you anything underneath right now because you don't have the ability to stretch the field beyond 15, 20 yards. And until they figure out a way to do that, defenses are only going to play about 20 yards from the line of scrimmage. They're going to keep everything in front of them. They're going to rally to the ball and make tackles. And I think at the end of the day, look, we know where the flaws of this roster is. And, I was talking about this with some folks on the way down to the locker room after the game. Elliott Wolf and this front office, they're going to have an interesting conundrum on their hands, John. What do? Do you take the potential franchise left tackle in Campbell or Jones or Adams, or do you pass that up and take someone like a Travis Hunter, assuming they're picking in the top 3 of the top 5? It's going to be a fascinating offseason to watch in regards to the pre-draft process, because if, in fact, let's say they do finish with a top 5 pick, for me, I think it's obvious. I think if you're in that position, you take the left tackle. Whether he's a franchise guy or not, you take the left tackle. I know it's going to be hard to pass up on a Travis Hunter or even a Will Johnson. I mean, they are superb talents, and Hunter in particular is a difference-making talent. But again, like we said earlier, if you can't protect, it's not going to matter. And right now, protection is their first problem. And I think the other problem here is and you saw it today at times, that's a really good secondary. You got Devon Witherspoon, You got Tariq Woolen, Julian Love. They really couldn't separate. And Seattle was able to sit in a lot of their too high coverage stuff. They were able to match up underneath and do what they do. And ultimately, the Patriots had no ability to separate. Let's talk about the defense here. The defense was fantastic last week in that 16-10 win rather, over Cincinnati. Today, not so much. Struggled to get off the field on third down, gave up big plays. They had communication issues on the back end. One route in particular proved to be costly today. They struggled with the slot fade. DK Metcalf catches a 56-yard touchdown pass. Tyler Lockett picks up 2 crucial pass interference calls on that route. The secondary had a really rough day. Just your overall thoughts on the defense.
Yeah, look, they only gave up 23 points in an overtime game. So on the surface, that should probably be good enough to win. But even if they had won this game, I would have walked away saying, wow, the defense has some things to clean up here before Thursday night. I mean, the tackling, first of all, I thought last week their tackling was phenomenal. I think their missed tackle rate was like the lowest in the league or top 3 lowest in the league. Today, not awful, but definitely a step back from last week. We saw a lot of missed tackles or second efforts by Seattle, getting 2 or 3 extra yards here and there. And that's just, again, that adds up over time. And the key situations in this game, last 2 minutes of the first half, they can't force a stop. They end up giving up a field goal. Overtime, they end up giving up a long drive that ends in the game-winning field goal, right? Even the drive for the tying field goal, I know they had that stop on third down, which forced a field goal, but still gave up a long drive that tied the game on a field goal. So I think this was a situation where last week your defense was phenomenal and your special teams was phenomenal and even forced a turnover. This week you have a block kick. Special teams doesn't really have much of an impact outside of that negative block kick. And your defense it's fine, but the Patriots defense, as we know, is talented enough and has enough acumen on the coaching staff that they should be a lot better than fine, right? They should be making, if not every key stop, at least one out of those key stops between the end of the first half and the end of the game, and then you probably have a different result.
Yeah, and Seattle had no running game today. I mean,
yeah, none at all.
Kenneth Walker was out. Zach Charbonnet, 14 carries, 38 yards. He did have a rushing touchdown, but outside of that, They had no running game. I mean, for them in order for them to win, I should say, they were going to have to throw the ball. They threw it 44 times. Geno Smith, 33 of 44 for 327 yards. And he threw the touchdown pass to DK Metcalf for 56 yards. But again, he looked like a poised veteran out there today, John. The Patriots have done a pretty good job, so far through 2 weeks of giving quarterbacks different exotic looks, bringing pressure from different angles. And they did that again today, but it didn't matter. I think at the end of the day, Geno Smith was poised. He was able to stay in the pocket, identify the blitz, and get the ball to the receiver he needed to. And, we talk about getting the ball underneath to the Patriots receivers. Seattle was able to do that all game long. They were really able to work the underneath in the middle of the field, and they were able to negate some of the Patriots' pressure. And that was because Geno Smith is a veteran quarterback who can ID it, and he can get the ball out to the right receiver. I thought he played like the savvy veteran that he is today. This is a guy who's, I think, very underrated. I mean, this is why Seattle ultimately decided to go with him post Russell Wilson, and they gave him the contract because he's going to win you games like this, and he's going to put you in a position to compete against better teams. And I think you saw why he's so good today in certain situations and why they're 2-0. This is a team, I think that's a sneaky team to keep an eye on in the NFC. I don't think enough people are talking about them. But with the Rams and their injury issues, San Francisco without McCaffrey, they're in first place in the NFC West. San Francisco lost today. So, again, I think it's one of those things where this is a good football team. And Mike McDonald's a good coach. He was a good hire. He kind of fits the way this ownership group and John Snyder want to play. And again, they hung in there today. Patriots could have very easily pulled away. They didn't. They let them hang around, and a team with a veteran quarterback was able to get it done in the end. And speaking of the Patriots defense, injuries were a part of the problem today. They lost Juwan Bentley pretty early to a shoulder injury. O'Shane Jimenez also left the game in the fourth quarter with a knee injury. That Bentley injury could prove to be a big deal. You got a short turnaround playing on Thursday night against the Jets. I would think there's a decent chance we're not going to see him on Thursday night.
Yeah, and you look at the next two teams you're playing. I mean, Breece Hall and the Jets, that's a really good running game. And then, of course, San Francisco, I know McCaffrey's going to be out, but we just saw what Jordan Mason did to the Jets, which is a good defense on Monday Night Football. I could see that being a problem over the next couple weeks for Juwan Bentley. And look, you mentioned Patriots defensively. Like DK Metcalf had the 56-yard touchdown catch, and that was a blown coverage. Big mistake, but it happens. They corrected it. What hurt them more is a guy like Jackson Smith and Jigba, 12 catches, 117 yards, but his average, 9.8. He wasn't stretching the field. It was a lot of –
he was fantastic.
Yeah, a lot of intermediate stuff, just getting first downs, things like that.
He was doing what he did at Ohio State.
Yeah.
That's why he was a first-round talent, John, because of his ability to work the underneath and work outside the hashes. He's one of the best route runners in the league, even at his age, even though he's a second-year receiver. And he's smart. He's so good at working – the holes in zone coverage. He knows how to find the vacant spots. He did that a bunch today.
And I felt like, too, the Patriots' pressure, they sacked Geno Smith 3 times, and I thought early in the game their pressure was fantastic. It felt like it faded a little bit as the game went on, and they were blitzing a decent amount, bringing extra guys, and it just felt like they were getting there a lot early in the game. And then as the game went on, they still got there periodically, but they weren't getting there nearly as much. We saw in that final drive in overtime, they tried to bring pressure multiple times, couldn't really get there. One of them was a big completion for a first down. So it felt like that's something that they have the ability to bring pressure. And I don't know if it was guys got tired as the game went on. It is only week 2, or if Seattle adjusted schematically, and that's something DeMarcus Covington has to now adjust to. But it just felt like pressure-wise, they have the guys to do it. As the game went on, though, it felt like it got less effective.
Well, the other problem is when you talk about base pressure, outside of Keon White, who had another really good game today, outside of Keon White, they're not really getting much from anybody else in terms of a push. They have to generate pressure in order to get to the opposing quarterback. So today was a game where I think you did miss Christian Barmore inside a little bit. I think that's the thing with Geno Smith. You got to get A-gap, B-gap pressure against him, make him go laterally so that he has to throw the ball on the run. They didn't really do that today. Outside of when Keon White got pressure on him, they didn't consistently get pressure on him. And, to your point about them having to blitz to get there, that comes with a price, right? As
Yeah.
we saw in overtime, they started playing more man coverage because Covington did call more 5 and 6 man pressures, but they didn't get there. And that Seattle offensive line, you're missing Lucas at right tackle, but Charles Cross, pretty good left tackle. They've had some turnover inside. They did sign Laken Tomlinson, good veteran. He's been a nice addition for them. Williams at center has been a nice addition for them. They were able to pick up those pressures, and that proved to be the difference today. But it'll be interesting to see on Thursday night what the Patriots do with Aaron Rodgers. As we've seen through 2 weeks with him, he's not the Aaron Rodgers of old here. He's not going to break contain and extend plays and give you a little pump head fake and pick up an extra 5 yards. He has to learn to survive in the pocket now. He has to play from the pocket more. I'm curious to see what their plan for him is. As far as coaching goes, John, just some thoughts on the coaching staff today. I thought Alex Van Pelt called a pretty good game, but again, to talk about what we mentioned earlier, these receivers are non-existent in this offense, and you saw the frustration after the game. They're clearly frustrated. This staff has to find a way to get these guys involved, John. This team, they scored 20 points today, which is remarkable when you consider the fact that only 2 receivers touched the ball and they totaled 19 yards and a touchdown. They've got to find a way to get these guys going.
Yeah, I think each part of the coaching staff can walk away from this game with, some things they feel good about. Like in the grand scheme of things, Seattle is a playoff team and you went to overtime against them, right? Like, so yeah, there's things to feel good about.
It felt a lot like that Philly game, that home opener last year. It felt a lot like that.
And so there's, some good stuff to walk away from. Like, again, the run game looked great offensively. Like defense, your run defense was fantastic in this game. But there's also, again, on every element of this coaching staff, something to walk away with and say, ooh, we got to fix that. Whether it was I think the management at the end of the first half of the clock, that's more of a Gerard Mayo thing as a head coach. I thought that was a big problem. And look, obviously they don't call a play knowing Jacoby Brissett's going to throw an incomplete pass. But when it's 3rd down and 8 or 9, whatever it was, and you're backed up inside your own 10, probably just run the ball and get to halftime.
Yeah, they're not stopping the clock. Right. They're assuming you want to go to the half, which to a degree you can be critical of Mike McDonald in that situation. Ultimately, Mayo and the Patriots coaching staff bailed him out. But you're right. Run the ball in that situation. Run it down. Run the clock down when you're going to punt it. You don't want to give them the ball with more than 25, 30 seconds, because if you do, they have a shot with a decent return to get to midfield. They have one of the best kickers in the league with one of the strongest legs in the league. You're risking giving up points there, which they ultimately did.
Yeah, so that from a head coach perspective, there's obviously that. And then offensively, I would put Van Pelt in that too, because he's calling the plays. There are a couple other calls there. I mentioned that 3rd and 3 run in the third quarter. Not calling really, it felt like any deep shots. I think you'd want to change up. I think special teams wise, you got a field goal blocked, which might have been the single biggest play in the game. Like that's got to be corrected, right? And then defensively, I think Covington was terrific last week. I think he was good today, and there was just some breakdowns. But again, that DK Metcalf touchdown on the miscommunication, you got to get that sorted out. I think you're going to be like, I like them being aggressive. They just got to find the line of being a little too aggressive with pressure. And I think today at times, maybe they're a little too aggressive, especially late. Just work on finding that line. So again, I think in the grand scheme of things, hey, you lost in overtime to a team that's more talented than you and that's going to go to the playoffs. But I think each coach can walk away saying, well, there's a couple things that we need to get corrected before Thursday night. And a lot of these things, I think they can correct. I just don't know if they'll do it in time for Thursday.
Yeah, and I think one other thing I would say, and I'm not going to sit here and play Patriots coaching staff advisor, but the other thing they did a lot today, too, was they tried to disguise a lot. They moved around a lot on the back end. And look, I'm gonna put on my coaching hat here for a second. I'm not a big fan of disguising too much defensively. I think there's value in it, and I like it. I'm more about disguising fronts than I am coverages. We're living in an era now, John, where secondaries are rotating as much as they have in years. We're seeing a lot of 3 cloud, 3 sky. They're moving around a lot. They're dropping guys pre-snap and dropping them 20 yards to a deep path post-snap. I mean, that's great, but it leads to big plays like you saw today.
Yeah, and if I can just add one thing to that, it felt like their secondary had the most trouble, especially early on, when Seattle went with high tempo and whenever they used motion. It felt like every time Seattle used motion in the passing game, the Patriots tried to adjust and then somebody got open.
Yeah, and that's a great point because if you're going to disguise as much as they were disguising, the offense is going to counter that with movement. They're going to motion. They're going to trade tight ends. They're going to double trade and go into a YY look. They're going to do different things. And to your point about the tempo, it was intermittent tempo, but I thought Seahawks offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb did a great job of going to that tempo call at the right time. You get a chunk play, go to that tempo call now. They're reeling. They're trying to sub in personnel. That's a good time to go into that intermittent tempo and catch them. I thought the Seahawks did a really good job with that at a couple of key times today. But again, I think this moving around and disguising in the secondary, I thought it proved to be costly today. I thought they did too much of it. Seattle ran that slot fade, and they caught him for a touchdown, and then they caught him for 2 PIs because guys are trying to communicate post-snap, and they're getting caught out of position. So, yes, you could – I'm not saying that they shouldn't disguise anymore. That's not my point. My point is if you're going to do it, though, you got to clean it up, and you got to be careful – not to do it against teams that move so much. I mean, we're living in an era now with this modern West Coast offense now where you're seeing motion pretty much on every play. You're seeing motion. You're seeing them trade tight ends. You're seeing them motion and then motion back out. I mean, they're doing so many different things now, and that's done to put stress on a defense and limit their ability to disguise. Seattle did a really good job with it today. The Patriots tried to throw them off by disguising, and it proved to be costly. And again, I know the players are going to toe the company line and say it was miscommunication, and it was. I don't think it's anything more than that. Let's not make it more than it is. It was miscommunication, but I'm not trying to be critical of Covington here, but I do think it begs the question, if you were struggling communicating in your disguise looks and getting to your spots, maybe that's – and they did back away from it. They did play them more straight up in the second half and in overtime. Maybe they should have done that sooner.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, right? And it felt like as the game went on, they got better with it, so that's a good sign. But if I'm the Jets and I'm game planning against the Patriots defense, what am I going to try to do? Go fast and use a bunch of motion. Like until they show me otherwise, that's what I'm going to try to do.
The Jets system is the same system as we're seeing around the league, so that is what they'll do. Now, I will say Seattle's not necessarily a Shanahan, McVay, West Coast team. They're more of a spread team. But again, they did a lot of good stuff today. And this is the same system Grubb was running at Washington that put up huge numbers the last 2 years. It's that system, but it's been more nuanced with more NFL concepts. But certainly they did a really good job of putting the Patriots in a bind defensively, and it paid off for them as the game went on. I didn't get a chance to answer to read Lauren's comment, I should say. I felt losing Bentley was huge, and that's when Seattle started getting hot. It's definitely huge. I mean, because he's arguably your best run defender. I don't know how much of a factor he is in coverage. I mean, I guess in certain packages he is a factor in underneath coverages. But, yeah, I agree overall. I mean, losing him, he's your primary defensive signal caller. He's your primary adjuster. He does play in your nickel packages. He does make an impact underneath in coverage. He's probably your best run defender. He's a loss. And again, I would think he probably doesn't play Thursday night.
Yeah, and maybe he would have helped with some of those communication issues, I guess, because he's a captain, leader of the defense. And I know he's not in the secondary, but maybe he would have helped a little bit with that. But I think his injury, if he's out Thursday, is going to impact them more Thursday than it would have today. Just because, again, Breece Hall, that Jets running game is really good. So I would – again, it definitely impacted them today, but I think we will see a bigger impact of it on Thursday night if he's out.
All right, real quick, we have a couple minutes here as we wrap it up. Can they win Thursday night? It's a short turnaround. You're coming off a loss. They've already been preparing for the Jets. Now, like Mayo said in his post-game press conference, it's like a Wednesday for them in essence. But can they, with this quick turnaround, turn around and win on Thursday night in New York?
So, yeah, I think they can, but I would – as of now, I'd be picking the Jets. I think, again, just home team on a Thursday night. And I know it's kind of ironic.
And the Jets are in the same boat, by the way.
Right. And the Jets had to go to San Francisco, and then they just went to Tennessee. So they've been traveling a lot. So it's not like a lot of times the home team on a Thursday night, I think there's kind of an advantage there. Not so much in this. I just think what the Jets do well is not a good matchup for the Patriots. Like that's a great defensive line, pretty good against the run, can really get after the quarterback. that's not what like if the Patriots are going to struggle to run the ball against the Jets D line, they're going to have a lot of trouble. Sauce Gardner's an elite corner, and we've talked about their receivers kind of struggling to
He's
get
going to
going.
be bored on Thursday night.
Yeah, like, and then offensively, I think the Patriots defense will hang in there, and I think it'll be a close game. But the Jets, do they have just enough? Like, they're going to be able to run the ball better than Seattle. And they have Garrett Wilson. Like, they have some playmakers there. I think it's going to be a close, lower scoring game. It's just, I think what the Jets do well, especially defensively, is just a bad matchup for where the Patriots are struggling right now.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I think on paper, this is a really tough matchup for them. I think that they'll hold their own against Breece Hall. I think the issue is going to come up in offensively. I think they're going to struggle to protect. I don't think that they have a receiver that can really generate a matchup for them against that secondary. You can only work the middle of the field with the tight end so much. Yes, they can run the football and try to play a little bit of keep away here, but I don't necessarily think I would do that because I don't think this Jets offense is that potent. I think the Seattle offense is probably better on paper. If Kenneth Walker is healthy, Breece Hall is the better back, but not by much. So I think that the Jets offensively, I think the defense will do fine against this Jets offense. You're going to have Gonzalez on Garrett Wilson. It's how do you match up with the other pieces? But you're right. It's really about Breece Hall and whether or not you have Bentley because he's going to be a big part of that plan. But for me, I'm with you. I would pick the Jets simply because I just think offensively right now, they scored 20 points today. But I think offensively right now, it's just, I mean, the protection issues they're having going up against Quinnen Williams and that front. They did lose Mosley today. Who knows if he plays on Thursday night. But that Jets front's going to give this offensive line problems. And I just don't think that this passing game right now is at a place where you can challenge opposing defenses and put pressure on them vertically. And until that changes, it's going to be a struggle for this team offensively. John, great job as always, my friend. Great to see you. And let's do this again on Thursday night.
Yeah, we'll talk Thursday night, hopefully after a Patriots win, but we'll see.
Yes. Now, if they bottle up some of this and bring it with them, they can win on Thursday night. We're not saying, even though we're both saying early prediction, Jets, I agree with John. It's going to be a low-scoring game, but they have to find a way, especially in the second half, late in games, close games. They did it last week. They can do it again, but they have to find a way to close games out. They have to learn to be closers because until they do that, they're also going to lose these close games. I think part of that is you got to play with the lead earlier in the game and hold it. They're not in that position. If the game is tied or close going into the fourth, it's a 50-50 proposition. Right now, they're 1-1. So there you go. All right, well, that'll do it for this episode of the Patriots Pulse post-game show. Patriots lose in overtime to the Seattle Seahawks 23-20. For John Lyons, I'm John Sirenides. We'll be back with you again on Thursday night